Greetings, Philip Bateman here on behalf of BDO at the Federal Budget Review Dinner, and here with Zara Ritchie, Head of Global Transfer Pricing. Zara, could you share with us in a nutshell, what is global transfer pricing?
Well, transfer pricing is where multinationals are moving profits, expenses, losses from different jurisdictions. The theory is to arbitrage tax rates, but actually transfer pricing is really about how multinationals manage their businesses when they operate in multiple different countries, and it's just a part and parcel of how they operate.
As far as I'm aware, the restrictions on capital transfers into and out of Asian countries, for example, maybe specifically China, are so arduous you really wouldn't want to move a whole chunk of cash unless you were going to use it for something. So does it really follow an expansion kind of path?
Well, there are many countries where you want to be careful about how you generate income in that country because it's hard to get the income out, for sure. But transfer pricing is really all about where you're operating in a country, you're carrying on a business in a country, you've got activities in a country, you generate income, you might pay some tax in a country, and transfer pricing is about how much income you should generate in that country and then how much tax therefore should be paid in relation to those activities. And the arbitrage comes in because you can move activities around, you can move intellectual property around, arguably, you can charge for services or activities. So the theory is, again, that there's a bit of, I suppose, art around how transfer pricing is managed. But in my experience, multinationals don't use transfer pricing in an arbitrage way. It's really more about complying with the transfer pricing rules and getting on with business because that's what their focus is.
And you've been doing this quite a while, I believe.
I have close to 25 years.
Yeah, and what I've been noticing is as we get more into really a good versus bad debate in politics over the last 10 years, and now it's sort of heading towards a class warfare kind of thing, the individual versus the multinational. How do you feel multinationals are being treated? And is that really because they're sort of moving away from an effective social license to operate? Is it worthy that they're having that restriction taken away from them, or is there a general misunderstanding because of the way the media is soundbiting things?
I think a lot of it's the latter. I think a lot of it's politics as well. I think a lot of it's driven by the global economy and the state of the global economy, and there's only so much profit, there's only so much tax that's collected, so everybody wants a piece of that pie. I think that a lot of people would say that the multinational bashing is unfair, and they don't really deserve it. There's a small minority that push the envelope, but the vast number of multinationals do the right thing, and tax is a cost after all. So you should be able to manage your costs to an extent that you can keep them as low as you can legally, and in my experience that's what most multinationals do. So there's no question that the media beat it up, and the media are pushing that sort of moral debate, and so it's not a question of how much multinationals should be paying according to the law, but some would say it's a question of how much multinationals should pay according to their moral framework, and that's just not how tax works or should work.
So tax shouldn't work on the basis that people can add more into the society if they want it to, or do you mean as in it shouldn't be legislated that way?
I don't think that companies or individuals should be judged on morally how much they should pay. If you're a wealthy individual, does that mean you should pay multiples higher than somebody else in terms of the amount of tax? Same with a multinational. So I don't think that the moral debate is entirely fair. I think that there's a lot of good corporate governance that multinationals invest in. I think a lot of multinationals contribute to the community, they employ people. There's a lot of good things that multinationals do. So just focusing in on that moral debate around how much corporate income tax is paid is very, very narrow, and I do think it is unfair.
And I mean, my exposure to essentially the lack of director liability laws in Australia in relation to the governance, the intensive requirement for governance, for risk avoidance that is put on Australian directors, to me, means that they wouldn't be doing anything that's relatively obscure because of the essential liability that rests on their head.
Well, I think generally it's not deliberate or intentional. I think there's a difference between, tax avoidance, tax minimisation and tax evasion. So I think that, it would be very rare that you would find, big multinationals deliberately trying to minimise or avoid tax in a legal way. I think often it's the case that it's unintentional. In smaller businesses, it's in relation to lack of understanding, lack of appreciation, not understanding what the obligations are. Most taxpayers want to have a decent level of compliance, but the tax laws are fairly complex, so it's not always that easy.
Yeah, I was quite excited to see the exchange of information laws that were being put through, or at least proposed in the budget, in relation to, I think it was, the Panama Papers about 4.5 years ago, in relation to Cayman Island tax havens and things. I mean, because I know with a single payer payroll system the ATO is bringing in and things, it's simply a matter of time until all data is accessible. So it seems like, change might be slow, though we're getting access to more and more.
Well, there's been a lot of exchange of information between tax authorities for many years, many years. It's not new. But what we're seeing now with country-by-country reporting, which is a transparency measure with the largest multinationals, you have to be very large to be within that system, but there's a lot of data being collected from companies. There's a lot of data being collected in all different ways, as you say, and a lot of the tax authorities, particularly authorities as sophisticated as Australia, are collecting the data, they're analysing the data, and they're using that information to risk assess companies and taxpayers so that they can go after the ones that they think are high risk. Now that's sensible, to actually risk assess and decide, let's look at that, top echelon of companies that might be pushing the envelope. That doesn't mean looking at all companies. So actually also utilising the tax authorities' resources in a more constructive way where they're going to get, proper return on their dollar as well. So data sharing, data analytics, they say data is the new oil. But, is that the case? But, you'd have to expect with the technologies that we have, there'll be a lot of analytical work that's being done behind the scenes, which will be very useful for all tax authorities.
And you need people who can run the oil rig, and you need people who can transfer the oil that comes out of the ground into something usable for the organisation or for the community.
That's right, you do.
And we are here on the eve of the federal budget. So what's your take on the election that's coming up? What's your take on the budget? Have you got a takeaway about it or a feeling? We listened to one speaker who was, has made a career out of being a headhunter for people doing the wrong thing, and then two gentlemen who were, very well versed in the tax system, your partners at the BDO. What's your feel on the current state of things?
Well, I actually think that probably what Shorten has to say is a little bit more interesting what the current government has to say. So it's an election budget, and the opposition's response is an election response, isn't it? So I think what Shorten has to say is going to be interesting, with negative gearing, with minimising deductions or allowing deductions for individuals who are, obtaining tax advice. There's a lot of stuff in the Shorten response that it's kind of hard to understand and comprehend. I mean, my focus is with multinationals and transfer pricing. The government has announced continued funding to continue some of their programs where they're going to continue to review multinationals and, wealthy individuals and private family groups. So that's, the last 4 years. It's going to continue for another few years, and I think that, we're expecting that will continue with the opposition as well. So that's here to stay.
Yeah. So it looks like the ATO's found out how to do things. That was really interesting to me to hear that they're, now that they've had such success in court over the past few years, now they're getting more and more people simply to settle with them, because they're like, well, we could run you through the court system, and they go, yeah, and you're going to lose. So it's powerful. There's
a lot of confidence because the tax office, as you rightly point out, has had some wins in recent years. There's a lot of confidence that the tax office has, and I think that taxpayers feel that. You feel that in discussions with the tax authority, that they feel the power. Is that a good thing? No, I don't think it is a good thing, but it's where we are now. And I think that some taxpayers will push back, but at the end of the day, if you're talking about transfer pricing, for example, it's complex, it's subjective, it's unclear. There's a lot of commercially sensitive information that's involved in dealing with some of these issues. So going to court is not usually the first preference that most taxpayers, most corporates have. So that forces them into that position of having to negotiate and settle and resolve a dispute, in a way other than going to court.
Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.